I'm Jennifer Chan. I'm the founder of Exhibit Change. It's a design consultancy and think tank encouraging impact through design thinking and playful curiosity. Basically, I will try and partner with any kind of organization or project that I think really could be impacting from design thinking or playful curiosity, and that comes through in any number of ways. So it could come through, I've done like one-day design charrettes where we've done a bunch of idea generation, and then there's further ideas where I would be taking it into a project or taking it into further discussion or writing a report. So I've partnered with a BIA, so a business improvement area. I think that's what a BIA is. And then I've partnered with a youth organization that works doing mediation and justice leadership. And then also I might be partnering with a neighborhood services for a camp. Design thinking isn't really anything spectacularly new. It's actually the way that architects and engineers and creative people have always been thinking. It's just sort of now becoming really formulated in a way that there's a process to it. So using that to problem solve is actually really great in terms of following steps. I think there's probably some correlation between design and planning, but I think that planning maybe has to do with a larger scale things like streets and movement and circulation within the city, and I don't think that that's always something that can be addressed on the community level, although there's obviously things that you could speak to, like it'd be great if our city had more bike lanes, or it'd be great if we had better public transportation, and I think that has to do with planning, whereas I think designing has more to do with the things on a micro level, like the gravel in a playground, that those things can kind of be changed. A well-designed city means well-designed people, essentially. The idea being that people who can concentrate on the design of a city or think about the design of a city or use design to address problems in a city, I think can really take those processes into the design of their own lives. The average person probably doesn't think too much about the design of their city, but really being able to move through spaces, not have to think about, why is it that corner is laid out in that format or that park isn't really well lit. Those kinds of things distract from the way that people can be using those spaces. And so if those spaces are just created in a way that you don't think about those other things, then they can become spaces that really empower and invigorate people and the city. There are a lot of really well-designed spaces in cities, I think, and I think it's cities that think about things like public art and public spaces and engaging with communities beyond sort of the normal day-to-day operations. It's thinking about how people can participate in city changes. I think that there's a lot of different ways a space can inspire. There's obviously the blank canvas sort of approach where nothing is actually happening, and therefore everything that is moving and happening is actually within the people. And then there's always the spaces like public museums or art galleries or even people watching when you're at a cafe that can also spark new ideas. So I think that there's always opportunity in multiple kinds of spaces, so I don't think that there's kind of one or another that is better. I definitely think that parks and schools and museums and really any sort of public space is a forum for learning. And I think that it's those kinds of spaces that can actually become catalysts for change, and that those spaces are meant and designed for the public to use and for those spaces to be environments where ideas can happen and things can really start being activated. I think the most controversial thing about designing space is making assumptions, assuming that people are going to use a space or have to use a space in a certain way, or saying that this space is designed for this purpose and therefore that's the way people are going to use it, and assuming that people react to a space because that's the way it was designed. There's a few different things that I've heard of, sort of like how social housing has a concept of being transitional homes, and that then I think that there's less community engagement because people always assume that you're only going to be there for 5 years or less because it's transitional homing, and that I just find that a really odd term, because it's not like any individual will move into a home and say, well, this is my transitional home. I mean, everyone sort of moves into a space and makes it what it is for the time being, and then some people will move on or some people will not. And so I think that sometimes there are things that are pushed upon certain concepts that then people say, oh, this space was designed for this or didn't work because of other factors. I heard about Voices in a kind of long-winded way. You know, I found out about it through Cindy Tan, and then Cindy Tan said, you know, it might be a good idea to get involved with Diversity Voices because there is a need for what I'm doing and my sort of role in the city, and that, you know, so she suggested it, and then it just sort of developed. I thought Voices was a good way to connect with the public around perspectives, around how the community can be participating and how they can be active. And I do think that probably what I'm doing in terms of community engagement is a little bit different than the general Voices participants. I'm sure there's lots of engineers and architects and environmentalists and whatnot, and I don't know that there's really a professional distinction for community engagement right now, so I thought that might be a good idea to get involved. I think that Voices is a really great system for getting people more aware of what's going on in the city, and that community engagement is one part of how a city operates. I really would like them to think about how communities and neighborhoods are vital to the city, and how design-driven community engagement is really a great way to get people active in things that are happening in their own communities and in their own neighborhoods. Well, and I think that the main pitch is that being involved in design-driven community engagement is one step towards active participation, and I think that the more times you use the way you can use design to address a problem is one way. I mean, there's always discussion, there's also, you know, the other ways like rioting or picketing, but I think that when you actually are involved in coming up with an idea of how to solve a problem, it becomes much more positive than just negatively outputting energies into complaining. So I've done a bit of work with community organizations, and in the one area that I was working in Parkdale primarily, and we had one dedicated media person that came to almost all of our events, and beyond that we would barely get coverage. So, you know, if we're holding a really good community event, you know, we get one person and they cover for the local neighborhood newspaper. So for us to try and break into like the big players like CP24 or CTV, we could never figure out how to get them there. I think there's a lot happening in the city, so it makes it really hard to capture their attention at the time that you need it, because, you know, I don't know the strategy of, you know, when do they read and how do they schedule, and, you know, how do they plan for what their week is going to look like or their month is going to look like. There's so many events happening in the city that when you plan an event, it's very likely that there's at least 20 more events happening at the same time that are probably newsworthy. So if you can get someone to come out one time, then you should count your blessings, and then maybe in 5 more times you can get them to come again, and it's sort of just the luck of the draw, I guess. The media is a really key player in how people find things out, because the way they say things is usually the general perception of how people accept information. So I think that however you talk to them and however the media is involved in your process, that the more you can get them on board, the more likely it is that things will actually happen. So it would be great to learn about, what really engages someone from the media to be interested in your project and how to frame it so that they actually can get the key information they need out of you at the most timely format. I think social media really shares different vantage points of what you're trying to do, because you can use your Facebook identity for one thing, you can use your Twitter identity for another part, and you can use your blog and your website for another part. So I think that being able to share all the different stories and all the different ways you can share it, because Facebook you can share your videos, Twitter you can share your in the moment thoughts, and then in your blog you can share your more thought out stories. So I think that it's a really good way to get a wide spread of what you're trying to do, and it's just exciting when people like you on Facebook.